Well, Randy, welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining me again. Remind everybody who you are and what you do.
Andy, thanks as always for having me. My name is Randy King, and I am a personal protection specialist, I think is the term we finally landed on for what I do. The joke my family likes to make is my daughter's always had trouble telling people what my job is. So personal protection specialist seems to be, or expert seems to be the most palatable. But I am a traveling self-defense coach who's spoken all over the world and provided workshops and seminars all around a holistic approach to self-defense, being not just physical skills.
I like it. And your title is very fancy. Like very, very fancy. Like I
Oh,
think you could probably increase your rates to whatever you want to with that title, man.
well, I'm already working on it. Already working
Good.
on
Good.
it.
So obviously you like, you're one of these passionate instructors, and that's why I really like to talk to you. So for the people who are listening who have never done any sort of training in self-defense, good for them because they're listening to our conversation. But what is it that's going to motivate them to really understand that self-defense actually really is for them?
Well, I think it kind of comes down to nobody's worried about getting sick until they're sick, right? And self-defense is sort of that thing. As people, especially if you're in the first world, so if you have access to the internet, you're listening to a podcast, I'm going to assume you're in a place where a lot of the survival needs have been met. So we can live in this world of, oh, I don't need to learn self-protection because I've outsourced it to my tools or my dog or the police or some other person is taking care of that for me. And I think that's just fundamentally incorrect, because one of the things that people need to understand is no matter how good the system or structure or socioeconomic area you live in is, there's going to be a fraction of time during a high impact event that you are by yourself. And that resources might be coming, but you're going to need to buy yourself the time to accept that support that is on its way.
I
So I
like that.
think that people really need to look at personal protection more like another instructor said it, but more like fire safety and that sort of stuff, where you need to have a basic understanding of it and you need to train in it. And in that, just like with fire safety, if you train it right and if you train it correctly using proactive skills, a holistic approach, it actually improves your life pretty much at every level. So I think that self-defense is a critical life skill, but also I'm biased. It's how I make my money, right? So
Right. No, I agree with you. You used a great word there, and that was outsourced. And like us, being in the first world, who we have a fire department, we have an ambulance that's
mhm.
coming to help us, we have police that's coming to, we have a military protecting our country.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we've outsourced a lot of that. So a lot of people just assume, hey, I'm always going to be taken care of. I'm always going to be okay. So, what are some of the other assumptions that are incorrect that people make about self defense?
Well, this is something we cover. I guess maybe we won't put this in. I'll pump the book later, but this is something I cover extensively in my programs, which are the most common myths around self-defense, outsourcing your self-defense kind of being one of the major ones, right?
Hmm.
The other things I think that people, the aha moments I get in my presentations and when I'm speaking to groups is thoughts like, self-defense is not purely physical. I'm not the first person to say this, but there are so many skill sets that enhance self-defense and self-protection that have nothing to do with your physical being. And in order for it to truly be self-defense, it can't be purely physical, because if that is the requirement, only young and fit people are going to be allowed to defend themselves. And these are the people that statistically need the training the least. We want to be giving training to people in vulnerable sectors, people that might not be physically fit or have confidence. And so changing your mindset of self-defense from kicking, punching, and choking to situational awareness, boundary setting, conflict communication, understanding how bad guys select people, and then adjusting your life for that is going to make the biggest differences.
Gotcha. You said something really cool there. You and I have talked about this extensively. I love your
Yeah.
work on boundaries.
Oh, thank you.
Kind of talk to us about how boundaries can keep us safe in the realm of, I mean, obviously it can keep us safe everywhere, but
Yeah.
specifically in dealing with self defense.
Sure. I think one of the things that people really get confused about this is, and the luxury of writing the book is I've actually got to look at my material in like from a zoom out place. And one of the big aha moments I had is you cannot do any kind of de-escalation without a boundary strategy. These two things are married together, and a lot of people don't see it that way. They teach physical response, de-escalation, scaling force, moving on. But if you don't know your boundaries, if you don't know how you want to be treated, how you want to be interacted with, how you want to be spoken to, then how can you work from a stable place of de-escalation if you really don't know how you want this person to treat you? So boundary setting is one of my three fundamental pillars of my 80-20 method. Number one is personal value. If you don't believe you're worth defending, all of this is a waste of time because you're not going to use the skill set you have. Number two is healthy boundaries. Boundaries you've created that benefit your life and show the world how you want it to interact with you. Boundaries also have a little bit of a collateral effect as well, in that if you set boundaries well, you don't have to set them as often because other people hear your boundaries in conversations. And then the last pillar for my kind of self-defense method, everything is propped up on, is community of choice. People, maybe you were born into a good family. I wasn't, but maybe you were born into a good family, or you had to build some sort of network around you. But community is one of the greatest deterrents to violence there is. So understanding that these three things need to be met first before we even talk about physical responses or awareness or anything else. If you don't think you're worth it, if you don't know how people should be treating you and what the rules are to engage with you, and you don't have a support structure around you, I don't care how good your rear naked choke is, the aftermath of violence is probably going to crush you.
Yeah, and that's something that people don't think about often is like, okay, self-defense is just for that moment, and you're
Yeah.
talking about what to do afterward and how that affects you. And
Yeah.
all of kind of go through some of the things that people might experience and might feel after, let's say, a positive, survival encounter in self-defense.
So, like, on a positive side, if you do righteously defend yourself and you have a community that can support you, then you're going to have that standard confidence and buy-in of the skill set. Like, humans do really well with reward. So if you do this well, your reward system will be good and your self-defense strategies will get reinforced. The problem is most people handle this poorly. I use myself as an example, right? I was a bouncer for 11 years, close protection, like every martial arts instructor on the planet. And I got stabbed. I've been stabbed a couple of times, but one of the major ones that I talk about, I'll just paraphrase here because it's on the internet ad nauseum, the story, is I don't remember what getting stabbed really feels like, but I definitely remember physiotherapy and speech therapy. Like, I definitely remember the recovery and aftermath of this. And one of the issues that I have with a lot of people in the industry is they're telling these hero stories without the full context of what it took for them to get back to normal. Right? Because we have this view of violence that if we punch hard enough, if we grapple well enough, if we draw our tool quick enough, that everything's going to be fine. It's like a Jason Bourne movie. You can get beat up in one scene and the next scene, take a little dirt off your forehead, go pick up the attractive human you're into, and then happily ever after. And that's just not the case. There's just the second you choose or the only option is hands-on, everything after that, your life changes. There's just no way around that. And I think people don't take that into account because nobody's having real conversations about self-defense. They're just talking about power fantasies and John Wick moves, and they're not actually looking at the entire context of this, which is why the book is all about the whole thing.
Yes, and that's why I'm thankful you're writing this book. Go ahead and kind of give us the synopsis of what we can expect when we get it.
Sure. So book should be out in September, I hope. We're working on cover and editing right now. I'm a little long-winded, so the editing process has been personally painful. Things that I think are important to repeat, the editor's like, you said this already. But the whole book is the title right now, well, the title, I guess, is Before, During, After, the Timeline of Self-Defense. And what it does is the first part of the book goes over the problem in the self-defense industry, according to me. The most common self-defense myths out there. We talk about outsourcing. We talk about purely physical. We talk about stranger danger and how ridiculous of a myth that is. And we break it all down scientifically for all you number heads out there. Then we go into what I call the 80-20 method, which is the way that I teach. And I've had great success with. A lot of people around the world have done this and had very successful careers or self-defense situations because of this teaching. Then we kind of go over the before, during, after phases. Part 2 is all about that. So we talk about before, how bad guys select, how to avoid problems in general, how to use situational awareness as a thermostat, not a thermometer. So as a way to control your environment, not just to see what's happening. And I think that's a huge distinction people don't make about situational awareness is they use it as a thermometer. They use it to see what the temperature of a room is. I propose use as a thermostat. Use your situational awareness to control the environment so you can put yourself into a better situation. Then we move on to the during part. We talked about physical strategies, multiple opponents, the things that happen to us internally. Most of my work that's out there is about what I call the dump or adrenaline dump. So all of that's in the book. And then we talk boundaries and de-escalation, again, how they're married. And then the last chunk is the aftermath. Then we talk about immediate concerns, short-term and long-term. And then a bonus chapter on how to find a good training space. And that's pretty much the book.
That's good, man, and that's gonna answer a lot of questions for people, which I think is gonna be fantastic, and, I know you have talked about a lot of those things on this podcast before, so
Yeah.
anybody who is liking what you're hearing from Randy, obviously go buy the book when it comes out in September, but find our other conversations because he tells great stories, and I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of good stories in the book as well,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm excited for you. In the book, you talk about the total timeline. Do you talk about victim selection from the point of view of the attacker?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the critical parts of self-defense that people aren't talking about when they talk about their self-defense strategy. The goal of this book is once you finish it, you should have a real basic self-defense strategy of what kind of crimes you'd be selected for, what target pools you're in, what to do to avoid it, and what to pay attention to. One of the biggest issues in the self-defense community is the fear-based approach,
Mm.
right? So, like, there's people worrying about stuff that is never going to happen to them. And once you pare down, like once you understand that there are way more dangerous jobs than walking down the street, there are way more dangerous things out there. How do people survive those jobs? Through training. Self defense is your training for life. That's how it works. So, walking down the street, these are the skills you need if you feel like you might be selected for violence. So, we kind of break it down into a couple of chunks. We talk about stranger danger violence, which is not as common as people like to talk about, but it's the most discussed because it's the easiest thing to answer. There's a clear good guy and a clear bad guy. Then we talk about what's known as attacker known, which is ongoing violence, somebody who selects you for long-term predation or bullying. Then we use Miller a lot. I use Miller a lot. He's my mentor, Rory Miller. He's a big, huge influence on my work. I'm very lucky to have toured with them and worked with them. He's a beta reader. So I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of notes back. But then we talk about the goals of violence. Are they social goals? Are they predatory goals, right? Am I trying to use you for a toy? Do I want a resource from you? Or is this all about my ego? Is it about territory? Is it about membership? Is it about rules? Once you know those parameters, stranger danger, attacker known, and social versus predatory, then you can start looking at potential crimes and how they select. Because the fundamental thing that people need to understand is bad guys are closer to us than they are away from us. They aren't monsters that live in the woods. They're humans solving problems. So if you get your headspace in a problem solving mentality, you're going to see how they set their crimes up. You're going to see who they're going to select. And once you have that information, you can start making little adjustments to live your life more boldly and not be terrified all the time because every 3 seconds on the news, something bad is happening.
Yeah, very well said. Very well
Thank you.
said. And I think there's, going back to one of those myths. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of say what you said again. We always
Mhm.
think that bad guys are these people who live in these deep, dark layers in the woods and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. And they're actually the people who are in your office. That might be somebody who goes to church with you. It might be
Mhm.
somebody who parked next to you in the parking lot that you don't have any sort of relationship with. But yeah, they are closer to us than we're comfortable in understanding, which is um just a great concept. I understood that concept, but that's just a great way to explain it, and I appreciate you saying it that way.
Well, and I think that's the whole point of this book and why I'm doing it is I want to come to people at a very like new user place, right? Like here's the simplest stuff that gives these are 90 percenters. These are the things you need to know that's going to keep you safe from 90% of the crimes you might be selected for. And then if you want to get more specific, go do specific stuff. Go find an instructor who wants to talk about specific slivers of the beast of violence. But I really want you to understand it as a whole. And I think once you're armed with that, then I'm confident you can take any training because then you can go and be like, oh, from my baseline, that doesn't make sense. I'm not going to accept that. Use that Bruce Lee mentality of shed what is useless, right? And then be like, oh, but hey, this move is good. I remember I got into Greco-Roman wrestling for a couple of years, pretty heavy. And a lot of Greco-Roman stuff didn't work in my real world jobs, right? Like, sure, the stand-up stuff, but anything on the ground really wasn't that functional. But I could still enjoy taking Greco-Roman wrestling without hooping on the art because I knew, okay, this is sport-based. I'm probably not going to use this, but I can be polite. Here's the thing I'm going to put reps into because it's functional. But without that baseline knowledge of just the concept of violence, how can a new person know what is real, what is snake oil, and what might not be useful for them? So my goal is to give a base level education so everybody starts taking self-defense can be a better consumer.
Very good. Yeah. So, I like the whole holistic approach to everything, obviously from, victim selection to how you're going to deal with the aftermath of everything. But, when you're looking at this, what are some of the I know this is gonna be kinda hard because every single situation is different.
Yeah.
But what are some common red flags that people need to understand to say, "Hey, I might need to pay attention to this. I might need to change my behavior." What are just some and I know you've talked to a lot of victims who probably have very similar stories. Their timeline is very similar. Kinda
Yeah.
go over some of those red flags with us.
Yeah. So I think the first thing you have to pay attention to is that maybe. This is where people get into a lot of trouble and where when you talk to victims, as you've mentioned, I work with a lot of people who've gone through a lot of horrific stuff, and I'm very blessed and honored that they're willing to share what they went through with me to help other people who might be going through the same thing. And almost always, especially in that attacker known situation, right? A coach, uh, intimate partner, somebody they know, a family member, unfortunately. It's that ambiguity where people get into trouble, right? When there's a clear red hat and a clear blue hat, you know what's right and what's wrong. But when there's other things, and this is where most self-defense exists, 80 to 90% of self-defense exists in this squishy, icky, maybe part that nobody wants to talk about, except for me and a few others out there. But that intuition, that instinct, that whatever you want to call it, sixth set, gut instinct, angel on your shoulder, I don't care how you classify it, that is going to be one of your number one indicators of red flags. And from that point, those ick feelings you have, those are what then establish your boundaries. And then that's how you then from that point start to actually discover red flags are. So for me to list red flags that I think are red flags as a straight white middle-aged man are going to be much different than my daughter's red flags, be different than my wife's red flags, or somebody in Kenya who's reading my book, right? So red flags are personal because there are some things people might shut down. So in my 20s, a red flag I have now in my 40s of somebody who drinks too heavily was a green flag in my 20s. I'm like, this guy parties, I love him, right? So as your boundaries evolve, your red flags are also going to evolve. So self-defense is deeply personal. That's one of my core tenets of everything that I do. And while I will give you examples so you can start the thinking process, this is going to be about you and your environment. You might have to put up with stuff that I'm going to say you don't put up with because that's how you put food on your table. So it would be just horrific for me to be like, and these are the 10 tips from Randy, and anybody who doesn't do this is stupid, because self-defense isn't a perfect science. It's more of an art. It's your expression of it. So, but there are things you should be paying attention to, right? Like when you're looking at stranger danger, people breaking social boundaries, people testing stuff, people commenting on your body language. That's always strange, right? Like I've never understood the you should smile more comment. Like I understand where it comes from, but what gives you the right to tell anybody what they should do with their face? Like what a weird, like when you really break it down, what a weird thing that is. And so, for example, if somebody's approaching me and I put my hands up, something I would teach, right, to get my interview stance going, keep my hands mobile so I don't get sucker punched. If they even address that at all, like, hey, why are you moving your hands so much? That's a red flag for me because I'm like, why do you care what I'm doing if you're just looking for directions at 7-Eleven?
There you go.
When you're looking at the attacker known side, somebody who's selecting a victim to predate on them long term. You have to remember this happens. And I'm going to pick on men a little bit here, but I know dudes that literally look for women with jobs so they can sleep on the couch and never have to work, right? These are also predators. Not every bad guy is Dexter Morgan trying to kill people, right? Not every bad guy is, a supervillain. There are just some icky bully people, time thieves and creeps that are also predating on people as well. So people that are looking to predate for a long time generally have a longer interview process, but they try to compress time. So if you're on a date with somebody and they're like, we should move in together after date 3, that's compressing time. This is jumping steps quickly. Also, if you have your boundaries set up and you understand them, boundary checks are a huge red flag when the boundary is clearly stated. Testing somebody like, hey, jump in the pool. I'm scared of water. No, you're not. That's not bad. Right?
Right. Right.
But if somebody's like, I'm terrified of water, and then they push you in, that's a bad sign. This person doesn't see you as a person that gets a vote in their life. They're going to do whatever they want to do to you, and you have no authority. So I think if you're looking at those two categories in a broad sense, those are going to be what you're paying attention to.
Right.
I always try to tell people to default to gut instinct, intuition, whatever you want to call it, but also be aware that that is also not perfect. So your gut instinct is your subconscious that is using past experience and pattern recognition to warn you of danger. If you grew up in an environment where that was hyper dialed up, your own instincts might also not be the best. So you might not be able to trust your intuition as much. This is, again, where boundaries come in, because then you can check your intuition with the boundary you set to make sure you're not being crazy. And the amount of people that have entered into bad situations because they didn't want to seem racist or that type of person or paranoid and then regretted it. I could write a book just on that, 3 times longer than the book that I have now from witness testimony, right? So that ambiguity, this is where the predator lives. They live in that, oh, it's just a joke. It was just a prank, bro. Oh, I was just joking about moving in. Oh, I was just joking about that, right? They have this ability to obfuscate your defense mechanisms. So once you're aware of that, things become a lot easier.
Yeah. And it's funny, you give a lot of great examples in there. And I often think about and this is, I guess, I don't know, a form of mental or emotional self-defense, but like between bosses and employees, and bosses that really want to push how they want things done. They don't like it when you say, hey, wait a minute, this may not be ethical, or hey, this is not what we offer. Why are we doing this? That sort of thing. And then they like berate you for having an opinion that is different than theirs.
Yeah. That's a red flag, right? You probably should be moving on. Like depending on when you grew up, your acceptance for power dynamic BS is going to be different. If you grew up in an older generation, you're going to think all bosses suck. Everybody's got to eat a little crow to get ahead. If you're a quiet quitting Gen Zer, you're going to have a much different threshold for putting up with that kind of stuff. These are the things that I mean when I say it's personal, is that everybody's going to look, what I think is weak, some people might think is insanely strong. What I think is extremely strong, some people might think is psychotic. So you need to find your own medium for this in order to make those judgments. And again, I think that's found in boundary setting. I think once you sit down, you think, hey, what are my physical boundaries? How do I want to be touched? How close do I want people to stand? What are my sexual boundaries? And not just safe words in the bedroom, innuendo, sexual jokes, conversations. Do you like that? Do you not? Right? Curse words can fall into there. What are my material boundaries? How do I want people to work with my stuff? How do I lend money? What are my intellectual boundaries? Where do I stand? What is my orientation? Blah, 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 right? Emotional boundaries. What can I put up with? What is not okay? Spiritual boundaries, if you're a religious person, can be split off from that, right? But once I start looking at this as a whole of what are all of these different boundaries that I'm working with, how do I like people to interact? Then the ambiguity goes away. Because once you clearly express, hey, I don't like this. So the example I always use is I'm not a hugger. I travel the world, and Andy, I'm sure you have the exact same experience. People meet me who have heard me talk on the internet for hundreds of hours, who think we're best friends, who I have no relationship with at all.
Right.
So the reason I kibosh hugs is not because I don't like hugs. I don't that much. But it's mostly because I don't want random strangers approaching me and trying to embrace me. It puts up my defense structure for my survival mechanisms. So just establishing that. So now when somebody's like, oh, I know you don't like hugs, but I want to give you a hug, that's a red flag.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But it's
know.
all found through my boundary setting. It's not,
Mhm.
it's not from a list on Facebook. It's not a TikTok video with the 5 things look out for the bad guy. It's me doing self-reflection to understand what I need to be safe.
Right. I love the little TikTok. Just throw that in there, just that little jab in there just for fun. Yeah.
Hey, we're on TikTok. I'm not against it. I'm just saying, don't
Right.
get your legal advice, self-defense advice, or financial advice for 1-minute video. That's a good life rule, I think.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Oh man. Gosh. Yeah. We could talk about that for a while, but goodness. Yeah. So when you talk about like you have your boundaries that you're setting, you have your
Mhm.
red flags,
Mhm.
each person's story their experience determines what's a red flag for them and what's a
Yeah.
red flag for you. So, you and I are both dads.
Yes.
What our children see as red flags
Yeah.
to them may not be a red flag to us.
Right.
How do we listen to them and how do we hear them out?
You just do the 2 things you said. You listen and you hear them out, right? Like a lot of people, I pick on power dynamics a lot because a lot of abuse is hidden within power dynamics extensively. We just watched the Simone Biles documentary. I didn't know that she was assaulted by the doctor
Yeah.
sexually, right?
Yeah.
But that was hidden in the power dynamic of, hey, you want to be a gymnast? You have to do these things, blah, blah, blah. And you can see this time and time again. There is a power, no matter how good of a parent you are, there should still be a power dynamic between you and your kids. You should treat them as equally as possible, but also realize you're still the adult, right? You still should, hopefully, you still know more than them. I'm worried my daughter is way smarter than me. She has my brain, but no interest in getting hit and brain damage like I did. So she's going to be
Probably a
laughing at
good
me.
thing.
Yeah, very good thing. Yeah, she should make money in a much different way than I do. But having those conversations and letting the kids know that they can have those conversations. I think one of the biggest mistakes parents make, and this is my next book. I have 1 book left in me, which I'm going to call Games I Played with My Daughter for Defense. And I had a bunch of games that I taught her that were self-defense oriented because I researched this very deeply. I'm a huge nerd. And the second I had a daughter, all the numbers came into my head and I was like, okay, how am I going to handle this? Right? How am I going to live in a world where I know this information, but also I don't want to scare this tiny child, right? And it fundamentally came down to having these conversations and not doing the thing that I think a lot of fathers do, which is become too macho about it and start saying things like, oh, if anybody ever touched my daughter, I would do this, this, and this. I'd end up in jail. I keep telling parents that have this mindset that what the kid is hearing is, I can't tell my dad I was raped because he will go to jail. Right? That's not a good place for you to start off at when you want to have these conversations. So you need to sit the kids down and say, hey, I'm going to love you no matter what. I'm going to make rational decisions, but you got to keep me in the loop. Particularly if you have young children, my workaround for it, because most predators hide abuse in games, I told my daughter that any game she learns, she has to teach me, specifically if it's secret, because I love secret games the most. So I learned a bunch of card games I didn't want to learn. I learned a bunch of board games I didn't want to learn, all for the just in case some weirdo was playing a doctor game, then she would tell me the rules. So you have to, unfortunately, accept that bad things can happen to anybody. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And once you've prepped yourself, if you start to put yourself in a triage/recovery place immediately, even before anything happens, the visualization of that and the repetition of that will make you very competent if it ever does come down to it. Because the worst thing a human can do is deal with something with no plan or experience.
Right.
Right? If you think your kid can never be touched, Simone Biles got touched. Like that's a very high level athlete with a lot of attention. It still happened. So once you get rid of the insane delusion that not your kid, and you start thinking about it, you can both make better decisions about how your kid is doing stuff and have real honest conversations with them. And don't scare them. Don't make them think that reporting to you is going to get you in trouble, because too many victims are already blaming themselves. You don't want to be the reason they don't tell you.
Right. And I also think with the whole macho dad thing, a
Yeah.
lot of that is macho dad doesn't understand how to deal with it. He
Exactly.
doesn't know what he's going to do. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, he's going to get very angry and he's going to get violent, and that I get, but that may pass in 10 minutes before they can make it to that person's house or where they
Yeah,
are.
sure.
So I think a lot of that just really is like the adult man in the relationship doesn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's true. Like it's horrific. And like all my big talk right now, luckily, as far as I know, nothing has happened. I'm pretty sure it hasn't because me and my daughter have an open relationship to talk about that kind of stuff. But it still haunts me every day. And it like I cite it in the book, but I'm sure you know this, but in case your listeners don't, the reason that we check candy during Halloween is based off of a myth. Nobody was giving away their drugs. Nobody was putting razor blades into candy at a level that should have caused hysteria cause. So culture shifted their entire mindset because of a myth. Is it bad to check kids' candy? No, right? I was never scared of trick or treating. I was always more worried about sleepovers. When my daughter went to a house with people I didn't know, with potential boyfriends or brothers or cousins or whatever, that was always way scarier for me. But most parents have it flipped. They're like, oh, we got to monitor our kids for trick or treating, but oh, the coach wants to take them on a camping trip. Thank God I get the weekend to myself, right? This is not a shot at busy parents. I grew up with a single mom. I understand what a relief it is to have a trusted adult take your kid for a weekend, sure, but trusted adults the key part, not just a person that got a job, maybe only for the reason to gain access to the type of person he was looking to predate on.
Right. Yes, very good point. Very good point.
Yeah.
I like the safety game idea that you were talking
Thank
about.
you.
I have played safety games with my kid. Please go off and write that book. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you about a scenario we were in. And this is definitely not a game at all because I didn't have time to think of anything.
Sure.
Just last week, my son and I, we had been working in our yard. It's really hot where we are.
Yeah.
And so
I bet.
I came back in, took a shower, and was about to like start fixing lunch for him because it's summer. And I got this notification on my watch that says your heart rate has been over 120 beats per minute for the
Oh,
last 10 minutes while you have been uh, sedentary. And I was like, oh, well, that's probably not good.
yeah.
So then I start to, like, oh, I just need to relax. I need to put my phone down. I'll lay down, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And so I told my son, I was like, hey, I just got this thing, just so you're aware of what's
Yeah.
going on. And he's like, hey, can you do that thing where you like, you feel your pulse? And I was like, oh, that's a great start. So I did. And it's like going crazy.
Right.
And so then I was like, okay, bud. So what would happen? What would you do if I was laying down here and you noticed that I wasn't moving or talking?
Yeah.
What would you do next? And he was like, well, I would drop the dog on you to see if you reacted to that. And I was like, okay, that's an 11-year-old answer to that. And I was like, okay, so what happens if I didn't move when you dropped the dog on me? Well, then I would call 911. I was like,
Nice.
okay, cool. What would you do? Tell them that you were not talking to me and I can't wake you up. Perfect. Okay. So now what door do you open for the ambulance? He's like, I'm going to
Mhm.
open the front door. It's like, all right. That's what
Yeah.
you need to know at this point in time. We've gone over it. That makes me feel better. That makes you feel better. Because as you've said earlier in our conversation, if people don't have a blueprint of
Yeah.
what to do when danger strikes,
Mhm.
the chances of them just shutting down skyrocket, right?
Yeah, and this is where we talk about like freezing. This is a big topic in the self-defense world. But freezing effectively happens when your brain doesn't know what to do, so it assumes the best thing to do is nothing and assess. Everybody freezes. You have to train yourself to lessen the depth and duration of the freeze, but understand that like when a shocking moment happens, or how prepped you are for it, it's going to take your brain a minute to deal with that. Even high level Delta Force snipers, sometimes they're gun jams. They have like a 0.2 second freeze. Training, good training without trauma, without the background of really bad responses. Because while training reduces depth and duration of the freeze, trauma increases depth and duration of freeze. So there might be people that freeze the highest level just when you go boo because their past was so horrific.
Yeah.
So you need to find your way to get to baseline and then to improve. That's your own personal journey. But what you're doing there is you're using visualization, and visualization is such a important part of self-protection. And I include this in self-protection. I include medical plans. I include fire escapes. We had a fire. Luckily, we had a plan to escape. Because of that, we saved one of our pets because literally weeks before we created a fire plan. and had a carrier for the pets to take them out. And then when the fire happened, we knew exactly what to do. And then I make fun of it because under stress, what comes out is habit and ritual. And so when I left the house, I grabbed my laptop and water bottle because that's what I did every day when I left. And so my family made fun of my special water bottle. But understanding that these visualizations is just the same as when you're on the plane and they do the safety dance. Studies have shown time and time again, even one repetition of knowing what to do when something bad happens increases your survivability exponentially. Visualization costs nothing. Nobody can charge you by the hour for it. Nobody can do anything for it. You can just sit in your home right now listening to this and look around. Is there a weapon near you? Where is your closest exit? How are you feeling? Are you tired? Is it nighttime? Have you had a couple of beverages, right? What would you do if somebody broke in through pick an entrance, a window? And just visualizing that stuff starts to lay the groundwork to prepare you not to freeze. You are not going to break a freeze in the moment. Breaking a freeze happens in training ahead of time. Visualization is your most cost-effective, least caloric expenditure way to get good at this stuff.
Right. And, even if you do have those like mental exercises, which I do those all of the time,
Yep.
if it doesn't look like the way you imagined it, doesn't mean that your response needs to necessarily change. And I know that comes
Exactly.
with some caveats, but yeah,
Yeah.
like just if you've thought about it, oh, somebody's breaking in the window. Well, obviously I need to get away from the window, call 911, leave my house, grab my
Yeah.
tool, whatever it is. Even if it doesn't look exactly like you've imagined it, and you're probably going to imagine it much worse than it may actually be.
Sure.
But like, yeah, just you have that information there to say, "Hey, this is what I'm gonna do."
Right. And it kind of falls down to like another real good life rule of doing something above average is better than doing nothing perfectly, right? So
Yes.
if when we look at how the brain responds to sudden stimulus, I break the freeze down into three categories. You can get really deep into it. But we have what I call detection freeze. Somebody says boo, you go, you see it's okay, you laugh, it's the shortest freeze. If you're visualizing, you're probably going to stay in that detection freeze of, hey, somebody broke through that window. I expected somebody to break through that window. So you're going to go to action faster than if you were in what we call a shocked freeze, which is something happens in a way you didn't expect it. My example is when I got punched with gloves versus the first time I got punched with a ring. Very different experiences mentally and emotionally. So let's say, for example, you're like, oh, somebody's going to break through my door, and they do, you're going to probably experience a detection freeze. If they break through a window you didn't consider, you knew that somebody might break into your house. So you're not totally flat-footed. It might be a slower response time, but you're better. The worst place is that what we call the overwhelmed freeze. And this is something happens that you had no idea could happen, i.e., my daughter gets molested or whatever, right? Once you're at that place of, I didn't think that could happen, it takes the human mind a long time to puzzle through what to do next. So you want to try to avoid that at all costs. So be aware of things that people can do, know what crimes are out there, know what you can be selected for, and you're going to automatically, without any training and no dollar in my pocket, reduce your response time to sudden violence.
Right. It's funny you talk about freezing, and I had this experience just before coming on with you. I was
Okay.
checking the oil in my car,
Yeah.
and I have one of those hoods that when you lift up, it has two hydraulic pistons that hold the hood up. It doesn't have the hood rod retainer
Right.
thing. So um, I discovered that I need to replace those
Oh,
because
no.
as I'm under it, I hear that gas seeping sound, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
shoot, the hood is coming down. And there was just this temporary freeze of probably about half a second, realizing I need to move. So
Yeah.
then I pull back. I'm holding the dipstick in my hand, and the thing just slams down and locks on me. And I'm like, oh, I'm obviously I'm okay. But I also felt like in that moment, I took a way long time to respond to just get my head out of the way. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you have reminded me of all those things.
Well, and I think it's super important because there's some stuff that you learn, especially when we go look at the physical side of this. You can train some stuff to near reflex, so your counter assault, with proper training and supervision and ways to test it properly. You can train some stuff to near reflex, but that's never really going to be the stuff that was going to get you in the first place, right? It's going to be so. Same example. We're using the barbecue more this year because it's hot. You're in. I don't remember where you are, but I know you're in the southern states ish. I'm in northern Canada, and it's everything's on fire. It's ridiculously hot here. So I'm assuming it's crazy hot there.
Yes.
I have a Canadian body. I'm not built for this heat, and so anyways, we're trying to use the barbecue more. And I was a drinking or two last night, and I turned it on and left the cap closed while I heated up, and then I hit the thing, and boom, a fireball backdrafted into my face. Right, sure, my hands came up. I did all the things that I patted myself with the back for years of training, but my arms are still singed. It still took me a minute of like, what just happened? Did I just get hit by a fireball? Is there a wizard here? Like what just happened? Right. So we go through this, and I think one of the things I really want the listeners to understand is every skill I talk about in the book or on these programs or in my online courses, all these skills are perishable skill sets. You cannot learn this once and then set it and forget it. So a really recent example, it's in the book, but this really recently happened. I'm teaching outside classes again here in Canada just for fun because I'm bored. My business is luckily doing well enough that I don't have to work that much to pay my bills. So I'm bored a lot of the time. So I'm teaching outside classes. And it was ridiculously hot, like 106 degrees in freedom units. We use Celsius up here, but it was hot. And I went to Walmart to grab water. In the lineup, I'm like, hey, is there water in that fridge? My wife said, no water in the fridge. I'm like, okay, I have to go to the water section to grab water and come back. Mission focused, tunnel vision, walked out of the lineup all the way at Walmart to the other side, grabbed the water and came back. As I come back and I'm calming down because there's time pressure, right? I got to go to teach class. I calm down, my vision expands, and I see a display 2 feet from where I was standing of the exact water that I was holding. I literally teach situational awareness. People give me money for this, but because it's a perishable skill set and I didn't think to access it, these things will go away. So boundaries, communication, awareness, physical skills, all these things degrade. So you got to keep topping them up.
Very good. Randy, I have absolutely enjoyed talking to you and hearing everything that you've got going on here. What's
Awesome.
one of the things that you're most excited about with this book?
I'm excited. So I've written a book before and it was on business. And what I like about the business book, and I think kind of why I wrote this book too, is I'm getting a little tired of the same conversations. So I'm very excited that this book should level up, for me at least, self-defense conversations of, hey, you already understand all the basics that I like to teach. They're in the book. So now what's the new question now that you know that? So that makes me really excited because I'm a lifelong student of this. I've always been very personal protection focused just because of how I grew up and the experiences that I've had and the jobs I've chosen to take. So I think once it gets in people's hands, I really do think there will be a level up in the community of just what like, who doesn't know that is? Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because if I do this correctly, and this book is ideally the gateway drug to more training, which is what I want it to be, that will be my legacy of, I don't want to talk to people that are already inducted. I don't need instructor camps. I don't want a certification program. I want people that have no idea what self-defense is, or maybe think it's too scary, to become dangerous and to know what is happening, even if this is the only thing that they do. So from the first reviews, that's what we're getting is, hey, this is great base level information. I didn't know these things. That's my most exciting part, is just taking everybody from kindergarten to grade 1 as a starting point.
Very good. Very good. So, Randy, where can people find out more about you and where can they find the book when it comes out? Give us all that.
Sure. So a couple things happen with the book. There might be a book deal. We'll see, like a
All
real one,
right.
not self-published. Yeah. So I am going to self-publish September. That'll be on the website. Amazon's going to have it. I published before, so I had to get that out there. And then it might change depending on how the publishing meeting goes. But yeah, Amazon, but just go to randykinglive.com or 8020cms.com, 8020cms.com. Everything is there. It's the hub. The website is under construction, so don't judge me on it. It's kind of an older format where I just paid a guy to make a new one. Also, I have a new show coming out as well called The Timeline of Self-Defense. I've done podcasts in the past. This one is a little different in the fact I'm doing a show format. So it's gonna be like news stories, interviews, and da-da-da-da. I'm kind of ripping off The Daily Show pretty hard. I like the format of that show.
That's a good show. Yeah.
But the cool part about this is the podcast is directly tied to the book. So
Mhm.
the format of the book is going to be the format of the podcast. And then if my scheme works, in 2 years of doing the podcast, which is the goal, I'll do a edition 2 of the book with all the new lessons I get from other instructors in the model that I'm teaching. So if you like this and you want to hear evolution, I'm bringing on PhDs, I'm bringing on people from different levels in order to critique and make my book better, which I think will be helpful for everybody.
Very good. Very good. Randy, I appreciate you. I appreciate the books. I appreciate the podcasts that I have listened to and been on.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you are continuing to help people. It is absolutely necessary. And I appreciate you for doing it, buddy.
Thanks as always for having me. And everybody, thanks for listening. Share this stuff. Share, share, share.
Please do. Yes, yes, please do. Because Randy wants more people to know how to defend themselves. So the first thing you could do is just
Yeah,
send somebody a link that says, hey, you might like this.
exactly. And stay tuned to the website. I think I'm releasing my original reality of violence course is going to be, I think, released for free because we're working on a brand new one. So there should be a ton of free information. That's why I do this. I didn't do this for money. I left a very lucrative career in advertising to make people safer. So please take advantage of all the content that's out there.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.